Chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky for questions.
Thank you, Chairman. So when I heard we were going to pass a bill that was going to define anti-Semitism, I got kind of encouraged because I've seen it defined 1,000 different ways, but then I go into this bill and I see there's actually no definition of anti-Semitism here. Mr. Fry, why? I know it says it adopts the IHRA definition, but why not just put that definition in the legislation?
I'm not the chief sponsor of the bill. I'm a co-sponsor of it. I think the reference, and I think you see this in other laws, certainly in my experience, that they reference certain things. So the reference, I think, suffices in my opinion. But I think the definition plus the examples that they give out pretty clearly gives, I think, some guidance to the Department of Education to look at this issue when they're examining complaints that are happening on college campuses.
So are the examples incorporated into this bill as well?
I believe so, but I may be I'm speaking off the top of my head. I believe so, yes.
So, because the definition, I think it would behoove us to actually put the definition in the bill. I don't know why you wouldn't stick it in there. It's, I think it's one sentence long if I found the definition itself on the website correctly. And then there are a lot of examples, which I suspect could change over time. And I actually agree with Ranking Member Nadler that some of these examples may be anti-Semitism, but they may not be in a different context. They're just not clear enough without the context around each of those examples. And yes, Mr. Nadler, would you like to speak to that?
That is why the chief author of the IRA definition, Ken Stern, said don't codify it. It should be regarded, it should be consulted, as should the other two definitions, which this bill specifically says don't consult. But the Jerusalem definition and the Nexus definition should be consulted. The IRA definition should be consulted, but none of them should be codified for exactly the reason you said. And that's the reason why the main author of the IRA definition has said, Ken Stern has said, don't codify it.
In fact, when I go to the website where this is stored, it says adopt, on 26 May 2016, plenary in Bucharest decided to adopt the following non-legally binding working definition of anti-Semitism. And then there's the definition, it's one sentence. And then I find a bunch of examples, which again, may or may not be anti-Semitic, depending on the context, I think. Mr. Fry, in your opening statements, I think you accurately characterized a lot of things that have gone on around the country, but I'm not sure that they are, that they should be used to characterize this bill, because you were talking about students and things that students had done, but we're also hearing that this bill doesn't bind students, it binds the faculty or the administration. Does this, so for instance, you said there were physical attacks. Aren't physical attacks already illegal? And why would we need a definition of anti-Semitism?
Physical attacks, assault, battery, things like that are usually statutory at the state and federal level.
So, okay, so I know you referenced physical attacks, and I thought to myself, well, we don't need this bill to define anti-Semitism to deal with physical attacks because those are already crimes, assault and whatnot. And then you referenced a case where students were arrested for trespassing only to be released and returned to campus. Did you reference that because you thought they should have been expelled or not returned to campus?
I'm sorry, will you repeat the question?
I think in part of your opening testimony, you related a story where, I'm not sure which university it was, but you said students were arrested for trespassing only to be later released and they returned to campus. Did you bring up that story because you think this bill would affect those students, that they wouldn't later be returned to campus if this bill passed?
I think the bill, if you look at the text of it, the bill is about the universities themselves, under the Civil Rights Act, under Title VI. And so the purpose of it in the text is that the Department of Education will take into consideration, of course, their existing statutory authority, but borrowing and using the definition with the IHRA, that would help to guide and shape their decisions on whether these things are happening on their campus. And of course, we apply this standard all across the board, not with this specific definition, but to race and to gender and to things like that. But I think this provides that guidance to the Department of Education on when they're assessing these things that are happening on their campus and their response or lack of response to them.
So would more students be arrested because this passes, or fewer students be arrested, or would, what do you think the result of this bill would be?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that this is how colleges govern themselves is answerable certainly to the president of the college and to the foundation and any number of entities at state and private level. But this is when the Department of Education is examining under Title VI whether these things are happening or not. The definition provides that guidance to determine or to ascertain whether these things are happening.
Okay, I hope you don't think my question is unfair. In your opening testimony, you said students were arrested, and I wondered how that related to the bill. Ranking Member Nadler.
Yeah, thank you. The bill would not increase or decrease the number of students or anybody else arrested at all. The bill, as I said, codifies one definition of anti-Semitism, a definition that the author says shouldn't be codified. And then it has this paragraph, if you want to look on page 4, section 5, or subsection 5, says, the use of alternative definitions of anti-Semitism impairs enforcement efforts by adding multiple standards and may fail to identify many of the modern manifestations of anti-Semitism, unquote. Now, there are two alternative definitions. The Jerusalem Declaration, made by, I think, 130 scholars in Jerusalem, or the Codification in Jerusalem, and the Nexus definition, I forget what Nexus stands for. All three of these definitions are basically examples. They're guidance and examples. And to say, none of which should be codified. But to codify one and say, don't look at the other two makes no sense at all.
So one of the examples that's listed on the website that has the definition, again, I'm troubled that we're not putting the definition in law. I have to rely on somebody's website to go find out what we're going to be making into law. But one of the examples they have in there is, which on its face you would think, yeah, that's anti-Semitism, perhaps, drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis, they give as an example. If somebody on campus said that Netanyahu's policies are leading to a de facto genocide of Palestinians, is that anti-Semitic? Is that an example of this example?
Well, I think what I would refer back to is where it says that criticism of Israel, just as a nation, similar to that leveled against any other country, cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. And so I think when the Department of Education conceptually or hypothetically is looking at a case, that criticism of the country or Netanyahu or whoever the prime minister may be isn't by itself definitive of anti-Semitism.
I saw that, and I was encouraged by that because we passed a law here in Congress that I voted against. I'm sorry, it was a non-binding resolution that passed that I think Mr. Nadler and I were on the same side of. It said that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Now, there may be, again, depending on the context, there are probably a lot of anti-Semitic people who are anti-Zionist, but the opposite isn't necessarily true, and I think we were wrong in this body to pass a resolution trying to absolutely equate the two. They're in the same zip code a lot of times, but you can't absolutely equate the two. So I was encouraged when I went to the website that this law references and found that it said what you just said, which is criticism of Israel isn't per se or on its face or necessarily anti-Semitic, but then it gives several examples of where criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. So that caused me some confusion. So for instance, if you accuse Israel as a state of exaggerating the Holocaust, and nobody here denies the Holocaust, and it was terrible, and it was large scale and massive, but if somebody wrote an academic paper trying to actually get to the actual number, and maybe they found evidence of another, or some kind of evidence to get a better number of it, is that anti-Semitic if they publish that paper criticizing Israel?
No, I think what's important here, Mr. Massie, and this is why I like the definition, is that it says, before it starts listing out the specific examples, it says contemporary examples of anti-Semitism in public life, the media, schools, the workplace, and in the religious sphere could, taking into account the overall context, include but are not limited to. And again, I think this goes to the Department of Education. It doesn't say that all these things isolated by themselves rise to the level of anti-Semitism, but it does say when you look at these specific examples, taking into the overall context of what is happening on University X or College Y, that these things could be considered anti-Semitism.
I find it interesting that that's almost a restatement of what Mr. Nadler said in opposition to such a rigid definition, is that the context matters. And that would be my position too, and I think that's why it's dangerous to take one definition from one organization and say this is the only definition, and here are their examples, which I'm not...
Especially when the author said don't do it.
Right, when the person who's responsible for curating the definition asked people not to do it, that's correct. I think it is dangerous. Is it, I've read the definition here, I'm still left with some questions. Would it be anti-Semitic to say that AIPAC should register under the FARA?
I think, again, this is about college campuses and universities, and how the Department of Education will examine issues related to those colleges. I don't think the bill seeks to do nothing but direct the Department of Education. I don't think it touches on the other facets of.
But if a professor of political science at one of these universities said that AIPAC is clearly an agent of a foreign country, they've got one single issue, which is to advocate for a better American-Israeli relationship, which usually means giving Israel money, or passing one of 36 bills that we've passed here since Mike Johnson became Speaker, or non-binding resolutions or amendments that deals with Israel. So if a political science professor at one of these universities said, the Foreign Agent Registration Act clearly applies to AIPAC, and he taught his students that, would that be an example of anti-Semitism that's being promoted at a university?
I think what's important, Mr. Massie, is that the definition itself, when you look at the definition, again, I'm not the Department of Education, and I wouldn't be an employee there waiting in on whether that was anti-Semitic or not. But the definition says that anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews, which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. And then it goes on to list certain things. But what is, I would say, important, an important mission for the Department of Education is that it says that when you take your example, but you take into account the overall context of that professor, that gives the Department of Education, I keep wanting to say energy, but the Department of Education sufficient guidance. Not only do you have Title VI and what it says, and all the cases that have come out of Title VI over the years, but you have this definition that expressly incorporates the IHRA's definition, which is broad at the top, but then lists certain things. What's important to me from a free speech aspect is that you have the text of the bill itself that protects the civil liberties. You have the definition itself, which says that criticism of Israel isn't necessarily anti-Semitic, and that you have to review these things in the context in which they are brought before the Department of Education.
What I was hoping for is you could read that definition and tell me a few examples, if I gave them to you, of whether they're anti-Semitic or not. Like, for instance, is it anti-Semitic to say that AIPAC should register under FARA.
I mean, I think that's again, me personally, I think that's a free speech issue. But again, the purpose of the bill is the context in which this is provided when you are examining the actions of a university or inactions of a university in propping this up.
Yeah, tell her I've got a few more questions. Yeah, I know my mic's hot. You can tell Kelly I'm still asking questions. So, you know, I didn't vote for one of these resolutions that came to the floor. This is why I'm reluctant. I mean, I intend to vote for the rule, but we're just getting worn out by these resolutions. We've done 36 now since Mike Johnson became Speaker, and we've sliced it and diced it every way you can do it. Everybody's introduced almost at this point a bill to deal with something along these lines since October 7th. None of them actually get to anything real. I think it's a political ping pong game. Of course, we get to serve every time, and a lot of these are just political traps. I call them sticky traps designed to split the Democrat Party and get them stuck in the sticky trap, and I've gotten stuck in almost every one of them myself because I believe absolutely in the First Amendment, and I don't vote for foreign aid. And I actually think a lot of people here are a little bit xenophobic with all of their resolutions against other countries and all of the sanctions against these other countries, so I've never voted for a sanction. So every one of these bills that comes forward, we hope to get the Democrats in the sticky trap. And I always end up there. And then I ended up with, for voting no against one of these, $90,000 of ads run against me in my district by AIPAC, by their super PAC, because I didn't vote for one of these resolutions. And I think it's ridiculous. And I said, now I'm going to get, again, back to the subject matter. I want you to tell me if this is anti-Semitic, because they said it was. I said, AIPAC always gets mad when I put America first. I won't be voting for their $14 billion shakedown of American taxpayers either. Let them know what you think by replying to their post. They are intentionally misrepresenting my intent and the resolution I voted against. So AIPAC comes back and says that I've made charges of dual loyalty, which is another trope which is mentioned in these examples, which again, it depends on the context, I believe, on whether that's anti-Semitic or not. But here they said charges of dual loyalty are anti-Semitic and insult millions of patriotic Americans who stand by Israel. They said that when I said America should come first, they said I was invoking an anti-Semitic trope. And I just want to know, do you think that was anti-Semitic, Mr. Fry, for me to say that America comes first and that's why I didn't vote for the money?
Mr. Massie, you and I have had multiple discussions, and we share many views, particularly on the college campus free speech aspect of this. What I would say is that you as a member have every right to express that. I don't think you're anti-Semitic in the least. I think you're a pretty good guy. I disagree with you, at least on this particular bill for sure, because I do think it's important that you provide that information. And what was intriguing to me when I was personally reviewing the bill, in the State House, we did a lot of stuff to augment free speech rights. In Congress, I feel like I like to do the same. I think clarity is incredibly important. And we've had a lot of people talk about funding the Civil Rights Division. Those debates happen between R's and D's and any number of individuals all the times about the scope of what they do. What's important is that I think you have to define these things. And so if the Department of Education, in my view, has had an inconsistent review of problems that have arisen at college campuses, it's important to make sure that the mission is something that Congress stamps on, that it's not just some executive order or rule that they create internally, that we're providing that guidance, whether it's through a bill, through an amendment, whatever the case is. But to answer your question in short, I think you're a pretty good guy.
Well, thank you. I think you're a good guy, too. And I also want to agree with you. I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm not xenophobic. I'm not racist. I'm not any of those things. In fact, every time we vote to do something to another country, I vote against it. Or every time we vote to do something to or for a class of people, I vote against it. Every life is precious and nobody is special, in my view. And I just, before we close, I want to say, Ranking Member Nadler, I'm glad to see the vestiges of the anti-war left and the First Amendment free speech left aren't completely gone here in this chamber, and I appreciate your viewpoint, and I yield back.
Sure. Thanks, gentlemen. Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia for questions.